And what is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 177 of Weighing In. I'm Marcus Hoehn, holed up in my bedroom and staring at my screen, joined virtually by my man, Dave Mirikitani. Dave, how's it going?
Good, Marcus. We've been talking a little more than normal with some of the stuff you and I got going on. So,
yeah, very exciting.
Yeah, exciting on multiple levels, I think. We'll get into that, but everything's good on my end. Looks like the haircut's holding up nicely on your end.
Yeah, I showered last night, so I didn't shower this morning. So I got a little poof, no product. That's all right. I feel like I need to maybe close my blind over here. I'm getting some pretty hard light from my window.
It's funny you talk about hair. I had Randy Couture on the show yesterday. The podcast will come out Sunday, but we had a couple hair conversations, and I told him he went from the best hair in wrestling to the worst ears in Hollywood.
I'll take that downgrade.
Yeah, right. Well, also, he's like you, like a bunch of you guys that can actually grow a beard like in a couple days too. Like I'm literally physically unable to do that. So I can't tell if I'm jealous or just,
Well, I'll tell you this, this is a little known secret, but I cannot grow mine very quickly. It fills in nicely, but it usually takes several weeks to fill in nicely. And if I shave it, it's a slow road back. My hair grows slow. Sometimes I can go like 2 months without a haircut.
Well, Couture's one of those guys that can pull off multiple looks. He can pull off the he can pull off, the bald and clean and sort of everywhere in between. Plus, even if he can't pull it off, who's gonna
point it out, right?
Yeah. So, we were going to talk about that. I guess we can start off with that. But
sure.
I interviewed him yesterday. The podcast will come out Sunday, which is right before Memorial Day. He's our friend, you know that, but he's an interesting guy. We talked a lot about the overlap of wrestling and MMA and kind of the future of the sport right now. And it's interesting, but his perspective is something that I think a lot of people will enjoy hearing. And, I think for me, I forget that he's older, he's like, he's been like a big brother to me, but, just in other things in life, but to kind of think about his perspective in wrestling, and he's been around all the greats, but his perspective is really unique, and I think people will enjoy hearing him. And it's a pretty relaxed conversation with him and me, as you well know. You've been in on a few of those. We discussed everything from his walking into the hospital and checking yourself in for a heart attack to how his copper mug collection is going. So it didn't get overly serious.
Yeah, the one thing about him that I have noticed is he has a lot of knowledge to share, but he's not going to just walk up to you and give it away.
He's a lot like my dad that way, honestly.
Yeah.
They're, that you coached with them a couple times, and it's fun to pick their brains. It's different for me because my dad's my dad, and Randy and I have done so many events together that now I just ask him, but it's a little intimidating in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But he's very generous intellectually, so anyway, he was very generous with his time, and it was a fun conversation. So it's kind of nice. We got some good news last night. I was watching the Lake Sports Center, and 3 of the states that have been kind of stoutly closed are saying they'll be reopened by June 1 with social distancing, but for sporting events, which was the state of New York, California, and Texas. And Florida's already open. And they put a statistic up for I think it was NBA, NHL, and MLB. 25 of the 91 teams from those 3 leagues are in one of those 3 states.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's like 27.5%, but basically
that's good.
3 out of 11, more or less. So that's really encouraging for us, because, you have to think about the number of those conferences, and, even if you don't think about, well, the California doesn't have, there's not a ton of wrestling schools in California, but there's a couple. And then if the Pac-12 says they're out, that screws up a bunch of things. So
right.
The fact that they're swinging the other way is very positive for us as a sport.
Absolutely. I was just talking to a parent this morning about They were asking about some things for us planning ahead. And I just said, for us, it's really hard to plan ahead right now and put anything in stone because we don't know for certain, what a season is going to look like next year. What if we're going to have a wrestling season and what it will look like and at what levels, the youth versus the high school at individual states versus NCAA. All of those might look different and we just don't know yet. So it's a lot of kind of waiting around and adapt and adjust as we move through it. And I think that's a great promising moves that are coming out of some of those states. Then that makes me feel a little bit better.
Yeah, what was interesting, and I kind of thought of you when I saw this on that same Sports Center. Nick Saban was on, the coach from Alabama, the football coach, and Van Pelt asked him, "Well, you're a guy that believes in a process and a structure and a plan, which I think most coaches do, and they don't just wing it, like walk in and go, I wonder what we're going to do today." You wrestled for a coach like Brian Smith that very much had a system and turned that program around. And he said one of the things was that first day it was like Friday, March 13th, he said, which I remember that, for us. He said, I immediately started rewriting plans and putting together new structures. And he goes, one of the things that we have improved, he goes, by doing all these Zoom casts and everything else, he goes, we've actually been able to more effectively teach strategies and game plans and packages, like people like a 46 defense, or here's what we do on third down and long, those kind of things. So, I mean, everybody out there right now is giving advice on what to do during this time. But I think, like one of the things I've always thought guys should do, and I don't think most guys do it very well, is scout themselves. Is break yourself down. Like, where am I weak? Where could a guy beat me? Like generally a one that you and I have talked about, but people is like, if I can get to your back leg, that's probably my best chance to finish on you, and that's on anybody because you're used to protecting your lead leg. So if I get to that back leg, so now it becomes, okay, well, do I spend a lot of time working on my back leg defense, or do I spend more time on being cognitively aware of head position and hand position and other things like that? And
sure.
Stuff like that.
That's actually a really good point because I think we've been talking a lot in our online classes about the correlation between wrestling and life. And a lot of people talk about that as far as character, right? But we've been talking more of like strategies, like things like that, right? And exactly what you're talking about is, I think sometimes we get caught up and I think it applies to the situation we're in right now. And I don't want to get political or anything, but the situation and how people have their different points of view. But I think sometimes we kind of make the false assumption that there's somehow a perfect decision or a perfect system out there. And we kind of get our mind is skewed and trapped into that because there's problems with what we're currently doing, that it's somehow not the right thing. And that's not necessarily true, right? Like there's no perfect way to do very many things. And just like you said, it's like there's trade-offs. And if I do this style, if I go with this stance, a really hard lead leg, the trade-off is that it's easier to get to my lead leg, but it's also harder to get to my trail leg. And I'm going to be way more used to defending my lead leg because people are going to be at it more. I don't know that that's right. It may be right for someone. It may not be right for someone else. Everyone has to try to figure out what the strategy is that's best for them. And, that's kind of, what we've been talking a lot about is don't be pigeonholed into a certain style or a certain move, that I'm a cradle guy, I'm a leg ride guy. It's like, try to be good at all those things. And as you move through this thing, you're going to start to figure out what works a little better than other things. And you're going to kind of gravitate towards certain things, but you'll have a wide knowledge base that if those things stop working, you're not just lost. You have some other frame of reference to go a different direction and go focus on something that you used to do, but you maybe don't do as much anymore.
Yeah, it goes back to that fastball curveball analogy I think we talked about a couple of weeks ago, where, I had a very high level coach, both in college and in USA Wrestling, say, ultimately when they're recruiting, they're looking for guys with fastballs. And I said, what do you mean by that? He goes, like, I watched you wrestle, Dave. And he goes, you beat everybody. He goes, but you were kind of a junk baller. And I was kind of insulting. I said, what do you mean? He goes, your dad taught you so much that if one thing didn't work, you would just go to the next thing. And I'm like, okay. And he goes, when you get to college, you just have to have one attack. You can get to the legs no matter what. because you have to have one ride that works no matter what. You have to have one escape that works no matter what. And he said, if you don't have that, you're going to struggle. And if you even go past college to the world level, I got to watch 9 days straight of the world. So that stuff kind of gets pounded into you, especially when it's happening between midnight and 9 a.m. It sticks in you just longer. But I think your point at your kid's age is even more true. Like, that's when they should be learning multiple things, because you're not figuring out what your fastball is at age 8.
Yeah.
Because those guys that do that, usually they're like headlockers, and then they get to high school and they can't do anything. They can't win.
I'm not gonna say any names, but I had a kid one time that was a dresser dumper. That was it. And if he couldn't get to that, he was lost. And I had another kid one time that was a cow catcher, brands, honey badger, whatever you want to call it. If he couldn't get that, he's lost. And that was a great point what you brought up, because we did actually talk about that yesterday, that, hey, all you guys are young, and as you get older, your later couple of years of high school, and as you're going into college, you probably will need to focus on one or two really, really high level attacks that that's my thing, right? But not at, like you said, not at 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Like, you need to be trying to as much as you can and figure out, what works and what doesn't for you. And how many times do we see kids at 12 and 13 who have one body type, but by the time they hit 17, they don't have that body type anymore. So, it just doesn't lend itself as well. And so trying to, at a young age, try to define who you are and what type of wrestler you are and exactly what you do is probably not the best strategy in my opinion. But
a shout out to a kid I'm like 99% sure wrestled with you at some point, Vinny Zurban. He's a kid like that, big, tall drink of water, but was wrestling like 113, 120 his freshman year. I really think he'll be a 74, 84 in college. I mean, we've heard about stories like that, but he's kind of a kid that, I've been able to work with, and, there are moves that work better as you get heavier, and stuff like that. Like, the ability to hand fight more in a Greco position is a lot more relevant if you're 184, 197 than if you're 125, where the match is wrestled. So it's, I think it's like a funnel, my dad taught us, like, hey, when you get in this position, there's probably 8 ways to finish, right? Like a head inside single, right? There's a bunch of ways to finish. And I used to think it was great to know all 8. Then I got around to, you just need to know 1, perfectly. And now I'm in the camp of, you need to know to which one you're going to go to first, but then you need to know the permutations off of that. Like, hey, if I'm a post my backhand, drive up into you, get the leg in the air. Okay, what are you going to do? Well, you can bust my head outside. You can push my head inside. You can square your hips up. And then depending on what you do, I'm either going to hit the corner, hit a cutback, post and split the middle. So I do have to know those other finishes, but I need to start the cycle first and make you predictable. So I think a guy like you have to know all those different holds. You have to know all those different transitions. And I like the word, in jiu-jitsu, they use the word transition all the time. They don't use the word chain wrestling. I like transition better. I think it cleans to your brain better. You're like, oh, okay. Chain wrestling is like you never stop, which I guess is right, but it's not. A transition is like, this move will lead into that move. And I think mentally, how a kid processes that is different.
Yes. Yeah, I think that, I think it paints more of a picture of that overlap, right? And like it puts more of the focus on how do you go from one thing to the next. Like, chain wrestling is just about, like, just try to move, don't stop moving, right? Like, you hit something, it doesn't work, find something else. The transition is more focused on, what do I do in that when I hit here and I'm going to something different? Where do I move my feet? How does my pressure change? What change in direction? We had a little group last night that was working out, and I was talking to them just about how it's all about balance. Like, you can't let yourself, your momentum, and like your together momentum, right? So like, one really good example for like middle school age and high school age is someone hits it, lowers their head, and they run through a blast double, and the other guy wraps around his chest and throws him over backwards, right? Like, because they both had too much momentum going one direction, and neither one of them is really in control. It's basically who's going to end in control whenever they land on the roll through, right? Is one guy going to hold his double and come back over and cover, or is he going to let go of his double and roll through, and maybe the guy puts him on his back, or maybe they just separate and nothing happens. But I told him, like, what you have to notice is when the pressure is changing to where you're like moving forward too rapidly or moving backward too rapidly, and like I need to change my direction and motion then, and it just balance and everything, so that if you're only attacking one leg, you need to start looking at the other leg. If you're only looking at legs, you need to start pulling the head down. If you're only pulling the head down, you need to fake the legs. Like keeping balance and keep yourself in check between those positions so you don't get caught up too much. But then also we had to circle back to the balance of that argument, which is that if you see that someone is up out of their stance a lot, they're okay standing up, right? You're going to have to hit fakes to get them down, and you're going to have to do it as long as it takes for it to start working, and not bailing on something too soon because it hasn't had time to develop. So understanding the nuance within those positions of when to be balanced and change to something different, and when to stick with what you're doing because it's going to work. It's just not, you haven't done it long enough yet.
Yeah. And we've been, it's interesting because this wasn't even on any of the agenda together, but it's a fun conversation. Like I was working with some jiu-jitsu guys on takedowns, and we were talking a lot about eye level, like, and I think eye level is a really easy way for people to understand that quickly. Like, hey, if you're looking straight ahead and you can't see their eyes, you're probably going to be able to get to their legs. And if you can look straight ahead and see the top of their head, you probably need to snap them down.
Yeah.
And then the fakes are what changes the eye level, like they talk about that in baseball. Like they'll throw, if it's 0-2, I'll throw throw a fastball like right up near your, like chest or neck level. So then the next one that looks like it's down and away is actually just on the corner. So anyway, lots of cool stuff there.
I always have to cut myself off in those conversations, and with the caveat that I tell people that if we head down this road, I could be here for hours.
Yeah. Well, one of the first thing we want to talk about was USA Wrestling had their return to mat guidelines, and it's on the mat.com. It's a huge printout. I just printed out the one sort of Reader's Digest graph, but there's basically phase 1, 2, 3, and 4, where it's the local public health guideline goes from the shelter in place lifted, to less than 10 people allowed, to public training allowed. And then, correspondingly, public training facilities are closed, open. Then coaching can either be virtually on site with 6 feet of separation, or full go. Then outside training with 6 foot separation, no. You can go through this whole thing. There was a lot of people like, oh, this is big news. And listen, USA Wrestling's awesome. But this is basically just putting out, hey, we're going to follow along with everybody else, but here's the specifics of what you can do tied to wrestling. But again, this is, when you're putting this together, it's a cause for optimism. I think that's the most important thing, because, you're like, okay, well, we're going to move out of these phases. We're going to move back to phase 4, which, I wish they had just named phase 4 normal. But,
Yeah. I get, and maybe I'm missing something here because I can be dense at times. But like the thing that I keep coming back to is what's changing. Like, I guess I'm failing to grasp, like, as we move back to opening things up, like what's changing? Like, what's the change? There's nothing there's no new development of any kind of like, oh, we have this in place now, and we know this works. It's like basically the same information we've known for a while, but we're just moving back. And I'm not saying that that's not a comment on whether it's right or wrong. That's just an observation that I had.
No, but it is, it's not a big leap to go. There's some politics involved there, right?
Sure.
So I think a lot of us are in agreement with you, like, hey, and we could get into statistics, and we don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but right. But basically what it is, it's public perception. You only change with perception. The other thing is this, it's kind of like fasting, right? Like for a day, it's uncomfortable. For a week, it's awful, And so I think people are like just getting to the end of the rope, like, hey, I need to get out. I need to do things. I need to make money. I need to be social. Randy and I talked about all the other things like suicide and depression and starvation and all these other things that are up, because, like we do a lot of work
Yeah.
with people with PTSD, which
Mm-hmm.
is suicide and depression. And he has this MVP group called Merging Vets and Players. And, it's all about creating a brotherhood or a sisterhood, but, creating bonds and helping people get through these things. And, one of the biggest causes of depression and then suicide is isolation. People feel like no one understands, no one will get it, no one wants to talk to me. Well, I can't imagine a worse time in the world to be depressed with PTSD.
Absolutely.
Right? And I know very little. I know probably more about this than most people because we've done all these events. So I've tried to educate myself, but I don't know firsthand what any of this is like. I mean, I've led a very charmed, sheltered life,
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not speaking from experience, except secondhand experience, but he was telling me how they do all these Zoom meetings, and that the Zoom meetings were actually better attended than some of the practices because guys could get to them easier. And, like, hey, guys, like, well, my wife left me. And the guy goes, my wife left me, and this is what helped me get through that. So I think people are just like, look, at a certain point, we got to take our chances. So.
Yeah, I think also something that people have pointed out one way, but I don't think it's been pointed out completely the right way. I haven't heard it anyway, which is, domestic violence is going to be on the rise. It already is on the rise. And a lot of people are just, going, hey, that's too, you're cooped up with your family and people fight. But I kind of, one thing I haven't heard anybody had a take on is like, what's the number one reason for divorce? Everyone knows.
Dishonesty, cheating,
money.
Yeah.
Right. It all comes down to money. Money makes people fight. And so like when you're cooped up with your family and you don't have money, that's the two most popular reasons that people would fight with their family. Right. So, that's a big one that I see worry about because it's also, it's going to be, people are going to be in bad shape and you have no one else to take it out on, unfortunately. And not that you should take it out on anyone. Right. But when you're cooped up in your house and you've lost your job.
Yeah, there's something to like going and hitting a heavy bag or going for yourself exhausted, or like wrestling, right? You get to put your hands on somebody and in a productive way release adrenaline and frustration and so
Right.
Well, so no good transition, but real wrestling stuff, Oregon State. So Chris Pendleton was hired out there and he said he was going to do a national search. He has put together the beginning of a staff with Nate Engel and Isaiah Martinez. But, Nate's a Missouri guy. Obviously, Isaiah's, Pendleton pointed out he's from California. And Nate's been at Stanford, among other places, but Stanford is most recent stop. And I think California is a big key to Oregon State's return to prominence. You have to be able to recruit California successfully. Arizona State has talked about that, that in order to be successful, they're going to have to recruit it. But Pendleton's gone a different path. Obviously it's too early to say how all these guys work together. But, most people are like hey, we all came from the same place kind of thing, like Oklahoma State's all Oklahoma State guys. Iowa's all Iowa guys. Hell, Iowa State's all ex-Iowa guys, So this is a very eclectic group. I mean, certainly guys that have a lot of credentials. When you saw the news, what did you think?
I was confused at first because the way that I saw it was Isaiah Martinez talking about giving away winter clothes, and I didn't know what was going on. I was like, wait, what? Did something happen globally with the climate that I'm not aware of, or I'm not sure what you're alluding to. So I had to do a little digging for a moment to figure out what was going on. But yeah, I thought it was very interesting. And then the confusing part was in the replies to that tweet, there was some mentions of Medlin in kind of vague terms. And then I thought, well, is he involved somehow of what's going on? So then I went and looked and found out.
Now that you know, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes more sense after kind of listening to you talk through it, actually. I think that California connection is super important, and we've talked about it. I can't remember. It's been all the weeks running together now, but we had talked not too long ago about how California has such a depth that there's so many kids there that are very talented that you have never heard of. And I think I was talking about how I had went to Reno Worlds a couple years ago, and you just find these kids in your bracket that you're like, I've never heard of this kid. I've looked him up on track. He's not been anywhere, and he is a freaking hammer.
He's on
And
the
like,
now he's in the semis. Yeah.
yeah. So
Well,
I think that's a huge insight, and you pointed that out very well. And I think that's a big deal for, Isaiah Martinez is a huge name, and he's from California, and he's got the there's a huge Latino makeup there within the state, right? So I think that anybody wants to identify with someone like them, and they see their path, like they see this kid who came from California and came from the same areas that they know and that they grew up knowing. They know the high school where he went to, and now he's one state away, right? Like he's right up there, and we can go to school and wrestle for him. And I think that that's a really cool opportunity for a lot of those kids, and I think that it's a really good fit, and it makes sense to me.
Well, the one thing I don't know is, does Oregon State have any sort of reciprocity with California or in-state tuition? But if they do, that would be freaking gigantic. Because,
Seems like if they don't, now would be the time to push that, right?
yeah, but the coaching staff's not going to be able to push it. You got to. The other thing is, how soon can you get in-state residents and all that other stuff, and like certain Big 12 schools, if you get a 24 on the ACT, you get the out-of-state tuition bump waived. So, hopefully Chris and those guys are on top of that. I mean, if not, to me, I look at that staff and Engel's going to be the organization guy. Like, if he's not, I'd be shocked, because that's, Nate and I have talked a lot. We're very similar that way. You and me work together. Everything's in a spreadsheet. Everything's in a Google Doc. You know what I mean? And it's how you get, in my opinion, it's how you get stuff done. You know where things are, that kind of thing. The one thing that I'm really interested in is, where does that put Imar with his training? Because he's the number 1 seed in the bracket. Now that's misleading because there's a guy waiting in the finals and there's a guy waiting in the semis. So he's really the 3 seed, but he's the number 1 seed in the bracket. And he doesn't have to hit Dake or JB until, if the seed's held, till Dake wins his semi match.
Yeah, I would. This might be something, and you can cancel me if you want, so you can just knock this down. But I'm wondering if the states had anything to do with this, even if it was just a small amount. Of Illinois is not in great shape right now, and they're still in full lockdown. And trying to bring anyone in to train with you, trying to do any kind of organized training camps and practices, it's probably very difficult. I don't know as much about Oregon because I'm just not on that side of the state, but I just wonder if any of that made the decision easier. Obviously, I'm not implying that would be the driving force.
But
right?
I do think that Imar was like a volunteer assistant, right? Like I originally initially just looked at the Illinois staff. I'm like, okay, it's Hef, it's Poeta, it's Hunter, and Medlin's the RTC coach. Imar was the volunteer assistant. Well, I don't know. It's Pendleton, and then I don't know if it's Nate and Imar, or if it's Nate and Imar, or Nate and Imar. But one of the Imar at worst is in the 3rd paid position. Now the volunteer coach is a misnomer. Those guys get paid, but they don't get paid like the rest of the staff. So it certainly was an economic decision. I think that had a lot to do with like Frank Molinaro. Like, one of the things is like, and you don't really talk to him about this, but like, hey, you kind of, you put your Olympic dream aside, right? Now I think Frank had a run. He'd done a quad. He'd made the team, and there were some, I'm not saying Frank couldn't have made the team. It'd be a stupid thing to say, but he certainly wasn't the favorite. I came within a whisker of beating JB, had him beat. I mean, until JB pulled his socks up. Then he didn't.
Right.
But, he's a lot closer, I think, and he's, closer to his prime. So I'll be interested to see how Imar's training goes. I know him and Medlin are really close. You and me had spoken about me talking to Medlin earlier last week. So anyway, that's an interesting development. The next thing tied to that, West Coast and, is Zahid and Ali Reagan are officially out at Sunkist. And neither one of those are a surprise. I just think it's worth mentioning that we know what's going on. Zahid continuing there makes all the sense in the world. All those girls from Iowa are going to be migrating down there eventually, it seems like. Allie's another, it's interesting. Some podcasts we had, there's no local connections. And this week there's a ton of local connections, with Nate being a Missouri guy, Allie being a Edwardsville, Carbondale girl. I think Edwardsville, but maybe I'm wrong. But anyway, like.
No, you're right. It's Carbondale.
Carbondale. Okay, but
Same as her and Zane.
okay,
Zane
there you go.
Richards, both from Carbondale.
Okay, but trained over there, I guess, a lot with like McCormick and McNamara rather than those guys, so, but they'll be at Sunkist, now everybody's sprinting for the next quad. And then tied to that is, and this one's interesting, is Vincenzo Joseph and Cassar signing with Nittany Lion. Now, on the surface, you're like, well, yeah, where else were they going to sign? But I know for a fact a couple of big RTCs were chasing Chenzo especially really hard. And I think Penn State's got some first world problems, right? We're like at 74 kilos. They've got Chenzo and Nolf. At 86, they've got Taylor and Nickel. Or at 97, they have Snyder and Nickel. And, it's kind of like, oh, well, Nickel's the floater. Like, Nickel's obviously a super legit guy. And then you brought something up about Cassar. So why don't you kind of jump in on that?
Yeah, so I was just curious. I wonder about how that if he has a contract, obviously with Nittany Lion Wrestling Club, and if there's any stipulations or that would keep him from training MMA or fighting MMA while he's training at Nittany Lion Wrestling Club. I saw a social media post with Bo Nickel and Cassar with Masvidal, and I would assume they were training. There wasn't a video of them training, but they were standing together, sweaty, in what would appear to be a post-workout.
They had done rounds together, so I'm sure they did. Yeah.
So, I'm just curious. I wonder what that holds, because I know that there was a little talk of that. I know Nickel, he's already wrestled in that submission grappling event and has put a lot of things out there that insinuate that he's kind of headed in that direction in some capacity or another.
Well, they're starting an 18 American Top Team branch at State College, so.
Yeah, I'd heard that, but I hadn't heard anything recently on it. Obviously, I would think they probably can't open anything right now, but so it's hard to tell.
It's still going to happen. I mean, that's happen. It makes sense for Penn State for so many reasons too, right? Like, I mean, first of all, you've got this, you've got the RTC money you've raised, and it keeps getting limited on how you can use that money. Well, this is a perfectly legal way. I mean, it's clearly in the white. It's not in the gray, but it also makes training there that much more attractive, right? Like,
yeah, you know what this reminds me of, and this might be really out there because I'm out there a lot, but there's a Netflix, no, I can't remember where I watched it, Hulu maybe. There's a documentary about the group of people, I don't know if you remember back in the early 90s, that did the Biosphere 2, where they lived inside for 2 years in that biosphere.
Okay.
Well, that group of people had been together for years before that, doing all kinds of different projects, but at the core of all of their little thing. So what they did and what they focused on was the things they wanted to do. But what they knew was they had to have some sort of capitalistic money-making side to that, to fuel and to fund the things that they wanted to do. They engineered and built this giant boat that they traveled around the world with. But the way that they did it was they built, like, when they sailed to Sri Lanka, they built a hotel. They bought a property and built a hotel. Now they have a functioning hotel with guests, with income. They went to London and bought a art gallery and had a functioning art gallery. So they had these income ways. And I think that reminds me a lot of, like, this ATT is a huge opportunity for that area to draw in grappling and MMA guys that want to have and I think it's just going to be a melding pot of ideas and philosophies. And I think that if you got those two groups together, that I think that some people could have some transcendent types of techniques, similar to when we watch Nolf and he does things that you go, what the, but it works.
Well, you think about the big MMA gyms, right? Like American Top Team's in Florida, and Jackson Wink is in Albuquerque, and Extreme Couture's in Vegas. And I don't want to short anybody, but I mean, those are kind of three of the big ones. There's a couple things there. First of all those guys are really generous. Like, I've talked to Mike Winklejohn, and he's like, hey, if you ever want to come through here, you're more than welcome, because we coached a fight together. Randy's always let guys come train there when they're getting ready for the U.S. Open, right? I mean, I sent some CBC guys out there a couple years ago, and I just made a call, and they were welcome to train there and get pictures and stuff like that. So I think it's sort of a two-way thing at least, right? Like, if you're the Nittany Lion Club or the Penn State guys, and in the off-season, guys are looking for a place to train and improve their wrestling, you'll bring in these guys that are unbelievable at jiu-jitsu or striking. They're like, oh, like, I'm a lightweight, I can train with RBY and Nick Lee, like these kind of, or I'm a heavyweight and I can train with Cassar and Snyder. And, Like you need to learn to get up off how to get up off the mat. Those are pretty good guys to hold you down, right? Like, they probably
I
still
would agree.
he'd probably still thumping dude. And then conversely, because of that, and you're like, hey, the facility's right across the street, and you know, there's there's limited ways you can make money as a wrestler when you're done wrestling. You can be a coach, you can compete at a super high international level. But honestly, the easiest way to make a lot of money, and Cejudo said this about how training for MMA is easier, is to do MMA, especially with like the PFL league where like Lance Palmer's won $1 million the last 2 seasons. And he's not taking beatings. He's just holding guys down and beating them up. So that's going to be big. And, you'll certainly see people follow that, I think, because, now instead of like, hey, we have to send you down to Jackson Wink or we need to send you down to Extreme Couture, well, we can bring guys here. I think, and one of the things having coached MMA is guys get away from what they're good at. And that's, I think it's more wrestlers get away from what they're good at because they fall in love with knocking guys out, or kicking guys in the head or breaking their arms. Like wrestling's the least glamorous part of MMA, but it's the most effective. So that'll be a really fascinating thing to watch on how that all shakes out. So,
yeah, wrestling and MMA is the, what would you say, like power eye, run it down your throat form of football. Right? Like, it's not the most exciting, it's not the most glamorous, but it's a truly effective and reliable way to compete.
Well, Randy said yesterday what my dad has said for years, that folk style wrestling is America's martial art, and that folk style wrestling is probably the best thing to learn for MMA. Because like you freestyle, you don't work on holding the guy down because the guy's not trying to get up. Same thing with wrestling. Right. And you don't get any points for throwing the guy over your head or crotch throwing him or leg lacing him, but holding it.
Don't tell my buddy Michael Chandler that.
Yeah. Well,
he thinks he gets extra points, I think, for suplexing dudes on his heads. And don't tell him that because I like watching him do it.
Yeah. But I think my point is correct. Like where you're holding guys down, that's where the grind is, right? And you and I have all been in those grind matches where like, okay, I'm a freshman. I'm going to be down on bottom here for an hour unless I get away from the senior, And,
well, that's one of the most helpless feelings there is, right? Is in folk style wrestling being on bottom when you can't get up. And that's the most frustrating, not the most probably. It's one of my top frustrating things as a coach when you hear parents, and it's so prevalent with youth, is like, you're not doing anything down there. You don't want off bottom. It's like, you must have just not wrestled for a while, because I can guarantee you anybody who has wrestled for longer than a week has been on bottom when they didn't want to be on bottom and done everything that they could to get off bottom and nothing worked. It's just a helpless feeling. And then especially if you add that he can start punching you in the side of the head while he's holding you down.
Or kneeing you in the quad or kneeing you in the ribs. And yeah. Right. It's even worse. And that's why mat returns. Anyway, all those things, this will be a fascinating thing. A blip last week that we should have probably mentioned, Lake Highland Prep in Florida is moving from the Florida State Athletic Association to the National Preps. So they'll be joining like the Blairs and the Wyoming Sems of the world. And I bring that up just because Lake Highland Prep, Mike Palazzo, they wrestle in our Beat the Street Chicago event. Palazzo and Powell were teammates and I think even roommates in college. So they're buddies, then Powell's the one that got them to come, but they have a really good team. They're sending a lot of kids to multiple levels of college, a lot to D1. And you and me were talking before we started about how those schools, like, nobody cares about whether or not they won, quote, state or not. Like they're trying to win, bigger things, frankly, like win Ironman, win Powerade, win Doc Buchanan, win Beast of the East, win a national prep title, and then make world teams get world medals. And if you're doing that, you will get scholarships. And, also they're prep school. So academically, you're going to be challenged. You're going to, probably be forced to do the right thing, probably mandatory study halls, that kind of stuff, which I think really helps because that's the habit people need to get into. I remember Mark Perry Jr. told me one time that Blair was harder than Iowa academically.
Oh, yeah. I'm friends with Brooks Black, former heavyweight from Illinois heavyweight, and he went to Blair. And he's told me, like, because I think a lot of us in wrestling, we just think of the wrestling of Blair. Like, Blair's really good at wrestling. But he's like, this is like an international college preparatory school with like sheiks and what's the political part where someone from another country,
Diplomats,
like diplomats,
ambassadors.
ambassadors, liaisons, all those, like that's where their kids go to school. And he just said it's just unbelievable the amount of money and the amount of intelligence and how hard the school is, because it's a legit college preparatory academy with a pretty good budget. So
Yeah.
It's tough.
Yeah, and I don't know Lake Highlands preps, academic comparison, but at most prep schools they're that way for a reason, So anyway, so that's a move that got made. This next one literally is like just the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Not what happened, but just the context of it. So John Smith is going to be the first wrestler inducted into the Oklahoma Sports Hall of Fame. Let me clarify. I don't think it's dumb that John Smith is going in. I think it's dumb that it took this long for John Smith to go in. I think it's beyond dumb that he's the only wrestler that will have ever gone in with, Dan Hodge and Kenny Monday and 100 other.
Well, just the state in general. Like when you think of wrestling in the history of the United States, it's like, Iowa, Oklahoma, and in more present times, PA. And like, not that PA hasn't always been tough, but if you just, what pops into your mind when you think wrestling in the United States, you think middle America, Oklahoma, Iowa. That's who's good at wrestling. Like for them to be like, hey, we should probably add some wrestlers to the Hall of Fame.
Well, it's not even wrestlers, it's wrestler. That's what's even worse.
Right. Well, they had to start with one, right? Like, who are you going to start with? It's got to be John W.
Yeah. So congrats to Coach Smith. I mean, I'm sure he gave you the aw shucks when we talked to him about it, but hopefully he opens the floodgates because that's ridiculous. So anyway, but congrats to him.
Congratulations, absolutely.
Yeah. Ethan Kyle, he's going to come on the show on Thursday. He took the head coaching job at Stillwater High School, which I saw it on social, and I texted EK. I'm like, is this true? And so we're going to get into all the reasons why and everything else. So people that don't know, EK is from St. Charles area here. Francis Howell High School, was a three-timer, got upset his senior year, went down there, kind of was a spot starter down there most of his career, but was a huge recruit coming out of high school, but was, I think, good enough as a person in terms of work ethic and credibility and reliability. He was actually a team captain, and then, was working with Oklahoma State for years as like a volunteer assistant. I know John thinks dearly of Ethan. I know this because I was at those camps. And then took the assistant job with Mark Branch at Wyoming. I think it looks like it's a step down, and certainly it is in terms of, hey, you go from college to high school, just in terms of the years of the people you're coaching. But I think Ethan will have a big impact there. They've got a couple hammers. They got a 106-pounder that won state. They have another kid, 120, 126, Carter Young, but he just said he's going to spend his senior year at the OTC, but that might just be a semester thing like what Rocky Elam did. But it's good for the state of Oklahoma. And I also think there'll be an announcement later about somebody who's going over there to that high school. It's known, but it's not known. And I was told it by the kid himself, but I'm going to let him make the announcement. But I think for Oklahoma State, it helps because, kids go there. It helps with the RTC. It helps with Cowboy Wrestling Club. It helps with summer training. I'm sure Ethan will get himself on the freestyle and cadet coaching, staffs. So congrats to EK.
Yeah, and I think something that probably helped, I always like to think of the things that maybe no one else kind of thinks of. But something to me that I think helps leverage that, and you kind of touched on them, is as a parent, I feel like you have more confidence in a program like Oklahoma State. Not, and when I say confidence, not to make your kid successful. I'm talking about what's in the back of a parent's mind that they probably don't say to their kid when their kid's getting recruited, which is, what if he doesn't turn out? Like, what if he doesn't end up being the person that they're recruiting him to be? And like when you have someone like Ethan Kyle around who, and I don't mean to insinuate anything negative because I think it's all positive. I think that if you're able to be that big of a recruit, good for you. And I don't think that he necessarily pan out per se, but like when you see someone who maybe didn't reach levels of success that you maybe thought they would when they went into college, but then you see after they leave that the coaching staff still believes in them, still wants them to be a part of their program. They see value in them. To me, that would make me feel better as a parent, knowing that I'm sending my kid to a program that, regardless of what he ends up ultimately doing as far as the starting lineup and an NCAA champion or an All-American, that he's valued as a contributor if he's doing the right things. And that's kind of what I would want for my kid, is that they're going to be valued if they're doing the right things, regardless of how successful they are.
Well, I think a lot of coaches do that, but a lot of them are like at lower levels. Like my dad kind of treated everybody good if, just he treated them like his own kids, but it's also junior college, right? Like you don't necessarily expect that from Oklahoma State, Iowa, Penn State, but you see it. Like you see like the guys that have gone through the programs at those schools and they talk about the loyalty, like the Paul Glynn's of the world that were really just spot starters. And I'm not saying that's still better than most guys have ever done in their life. So it's no disrespect, but obviously they didn't sign in Iowa to be a spot starter, but how much love they have for the coaching staff and vice versa. So it's really positive. And we know EK. He's just a good dude, his nephew signed with Wyoming and had wrestled at Hall. And so EK came in last summer and did a one-day camp with us. JK spends a lot of time training with us in the summertime, but really good. And Ethan's dad is awesome. It's an absolute trip, but in a good way. Ex-cops, if you ever want to hear some great stories, sit down with Ed. But anyway, so congratulations to Ethan. And it feels like we're sort of heavy Oklahoma State with John and with Ethan and with Randy. And so we'll finish it off with some more Oklahoma State. I'm really proud of what you and I put together here. So I think we kind of got to give people the quick genesis of this. So Alex Dieringer came on the podcast. Then he texted me and said, hey, how far is it from Stillwater to Michigan and what's halfway? And St. Louis is actually dang near within 15 minutes of, absolutely halfway. So he was just going to come through and stay and, hang out with me and, him and his girlfriend. And then you were smart enough to say you think he'd want to do a clinic. And yeah, of course. And then, you went and found a mutual friend of ours in the St. Louis area who has, an awesome MMA gym. We'll give a shout out to Steve Solzy and Krav Maga Gym in Fenton, which is a suburb right next to my suburb. So thank you for making it graphically convenient for me. And then
I wish I could say that was planned. Total happenstance, right? But I'll take it.
You're like, this guy? I'm like, a little bit. And then I talked to Grant Turner from Nike. So we need to give Nike a shout out. They're letting Alex donate the Nike Dieringer shirts to all the campers, which is awesome. He's going to autograph all those for the kids. And then on top of that, you came up with the idea of, hey, what if we did this as a Facebook stream, like a private group, and, charge a small fee for the technique. And then based on my relationship with Track Wrestling, we were able to reach out. And I'm going to give a shout out to Dennis Lemire, who, is kind of a behind the scenes guy at Track, but is an awesome guy. I got to know Dennis really well doing junior duels, because we sit next to him, and
right,
the guy that makes sure that everything runs right. And guys like Hardell and I sound hopefully as smart as we do, or at least less dumb. But really, really good guy. He'll show us the challenge camera, he's behind. He's like the Cody Bickley of Track Wrestling, does everything right and never takes any credit. So that's a huge compliment. So I reached out to Dennis. I'm like, hey, can we do this on Track? And I called you back with 7 minutes. I go 7 minutes, and Track was in. So it's a great combination of Thoroughbred Wrestling Academy and Nike and Track Wrestling and Extreme Krav Maga, Missouri Border Brawl, because they're going to donate some of the money to our charity. And it's the collaboration is really cool. And but so basically that's going to be Saturday the 30th. Is that right? Is that the date?
Yeah, real quick. If we're doing, if you want to do a screen share, I have the flyer pulled up. If we wanted to just post it so while we're talking, people can see it on the video. I think you just got to okay me for screen share, enable screen sharing. But if it's not set up, don't worry about it. We don't need to mess with it too much.
Well,
but yeah, I have all the info right here, so I can run through it. So we got it's May 30th, so it's Saturday, May 30th, from 5 to 7 p.m. Central Time. It's $14.99 for the live stream remotely. If you're in the area and you want to attend the camp, just message us on Thoroughbred Wrestling Academy, TWAMissouri.com is our website, or TWAMissouri@gmail.com, and we'll hook you up with the registration in person. But basically, we're gonna be going live stream with this clinic, and you can go to Track Wrestling. There's a link all over the place on social media. Just click and follow the link. Hit the purchase under video. After you make the purchase, you'll go back to video and hit watch live, and it should be live streaming. It will be live streaming the clinic. And something else I was going to pitch to you today, and I can't promise this, but I think I have some ways that we will be able to have where you can direct message us either on social media or something like that, and you can ask questions. So I want to be able to have some sort of interaction. I can't guarantee you that it'll be like Q&A, but if you throw it out at the beginning, maybe 30, 40 minutes into it, we get to some questions or something like that.
We'll ask questions ahead of time.
That'd be fantastic too. Yeah, tweet or Facebook, you message us.
Yeah, and so you can find obviously Marcus and I just on Facebook or Twitter. That's the other way. Just search our names and you can find us, or Thoroughbred Wrestling or TWA. And one of the things you and I talked about, and we are in complete agreement on this, which we didn't know ahead of time, but when you have a guy like Alex and you have him for a couple hours, we're not going to do live. Like, you can go do live next week. Like, you get to pick a guy's brain like this. It's one of the top 5 guys in the world at 79 kilograms. Like, let's let him teach. Let's let him talk. Let's learn from him, whether it's technique or whether it's mental approach, or, it's the same thing like when we had him on the podcast. And it's like, talk to him about what makes him tick. Talk to him about what makes him great. Obviously get out the questions, why'd you go to Michigan, things like that. But then the rest of it is that. So you and I had Alex in, I think 2 or 3 years ago. And, he's not a kid, he's a young man, but when you're old like me, you think of him as a kid, but he's just one of the nicest kids you'll ever meet. In terms of just being a genuine guy, doesn't hold himself above anybody else, is super nice to the kids. We know, my dad asked me, was he going to show that Near Arm Far Leg series? Like, yes, definitely going to show that series. That'll be, probably the main course. But, he taught us some other really slick stuff. Some cool versions of the Assassin and some things like that he had shown the last time. But I think if people want to, like, hey, how do you go from your arm far leg to your post high crotch, or, those kind of things, get those questions in. It's only a couple hours, so probably only gonna be able to answer maybe 4 or 5 really good questions anyway. But, it's $14.99. There's no way you're not going to learn something from it. The other thing is, if you run an academy, bring people over to your house, and everybody sits 6 feet apart and plug your laptop into a big screen and, watch it on a 75-inch TV,
Yeah, I think also, something we've had some of our kids who live, next to each other, and they're kind of staying within themselves, but there's maybe 2 kids that have been working out together by themselves and not being with anyone else. But those 2 kids, if they have a 10x10 mat in their basement or in their living room, throw that sucker down, pop it on the TV, and do the drills with us, learn the moves with us. So I think it's going to be really awesome.
And we've got people coming in from Kansas City. We got people coming in from Oklahoma. We got people coming in from Chicago. So, like, shout out, like, Matt Collins said he'd come down and, be the drill partner or one of the assistant coaches. So he's coming down. Jason Keck's bringing in Kale and Cal Miller, 2 Fargo All-Americans. Chris Forbes is bringing his son in, Christian, who's a multiple-time Fargo All-American. So, one of my dad's guys messaged me yesterday about signing up. So we're already like halfway full on the live signups, and we feel confident we'll get everybody signed up. But I'm the kind of guy, let's get them signed up ASAP. So if people want to join, really, probably when this 9 or 10.
And we kind of kept it under wraps for a little bit to give the people closest to us that we already know a chance to sign up first. And so only in the last probably 12 hours have I really put out anything. So I'm sure that those signups will go up quickly. So if you're thinking about coming, if you're in the area, I would get on it pretty quick, because I think we're going to cap it off at, I don't know, not a very big number. So I would get those spots.
Well, yeah, there's less than 25 spots left. Let's just say that, so get signed up. Well done by you, the graphics and everything, and well done by Dennis to get the pay-per-view set up so quickly, and, the QR code and all that other stuff. Like, I'm kind of a guy that thinks big and was happy that this thought big with track worked out, but I would never have known how to execute it. So you guys did a great job.
Hey, that's what, that's where we want to be well-rounded with all our skills, but then at a certain point in your life, you got to specialize a little bit. So it's just not what you specialized in. That's okay. You're good at a lot of other things that helped with this.
But that handshake, Dennis, Marcus, be friends and pull this off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean, we're all set. I've talked to all those people involved. The track kit is on its way. Like, it's going to be cool, and I think it's something that if we think it'll go well, we may make this a series. So the other thing that people can do is if they're calling in with or messaging in with thoughts for Ringer is who else would they like to see? Like, we have some ideas.
Yeah.
We kind of think like maybe getting somebody that does one or two skill sets really, really differently and well, for a short session like that, not that you can't learn how to do a high crotch a little bit better from a lot of people, but there's a lot of people out there that can teach that. Like I think Ringer's near arm far leg. You and I can teach near arm far leg, but we're not dumping Russians on their heads with it. So, it's
sure.
The credibility level of him.
Yeah.
Series. And it won at the highest levels in college. People knew it was coming. It's kind of like, Daniel Lewis with that leg series on top, which would actually be a good guy to have in now that I think about it.
Yeah, for sure.
Probably reach out to Daniel and see if he'd want to do that. So anyway, so I think that's it for this week. Let me make sure we thank our sponsors real quick. So Resolite, they're your one source for both classic and lightweight mats. Their Zipman is the first and only tape-free mat to offer a waterproof interlocking connection system. And their exclusive Digiprint mat is the only fully customizable mat featuring unlimited graphics, bringing unrivaled school branding to your new lightweight mat. Resolite.com for all your wrestling mat needs. Resolite, the mat company. Pure and Clean Sports does not cause skin burns. It doesn't expose your athletes to harsh chemicals. Read the label. Check the safety data sheet. Keep your wrestlers on the mat. Go to pureandcleansports.com. Order a wrestling team bundle and follow them on social media. And we want to thank them for supporting our veterans as well. And then we want to thank Grit, George Ivanoff, ttpnutrition.com. Get you hydrated quicker, get you training longer. As people are getting back to training, this is a good time to get that stuff, get that out of the way. Be ready with your mat cleaner, be ready with your Grit, be on your Resolite mat, and get ready to go. So I think we're good for this week. I want to, thank all those guys. We'll talk about the Dieringer thing again next week. Hope everybody has a great Memorial Day. People are probably grilling out and doing things, and just remember the real reason for Memorial Day. It hits me a little bit, not harder, because I haven't lost anybody that way, but doing the events that I've done, and you've done some of those with me. I think it makes maybe you take a minute to appreciate those people a little bit more coming Monday.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's. Do you want to, real quick before we head out, something we alluded to, we didn't mention, do you want to mention the raffle for those shoes?
Oh, yeah. So we're going to have –
we don't have anything set up for it, but I would say just keeping people aware that we're going to be
Alex is
on the
going
lookout for it.
Have a signed pair of Nikes he's going to bring in. And I think we're just going to do maybe we'll do a raffle. We'll have to figure this out for next week on anybody that likes and shares our post on any of social media. They automatically go into a drawing. And then we'll have him sign them in front of, so you can see it's authenticated, and it won't be any cost. We just want you guys to help share it for us. And,
Yeah. And that part of the big reason we're doing this is to help offset some of his costs for relocating. So he was extremely happy to see that his U-Haul and other bills might be paid for by doing this camp. So that'll be great.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned the U-Haul because, U-Haul will be parked in front of my house next weekend.
For security purposes.
Yeah, for security purposes. Exactly right. We should just park him at my dad's house and then nothing would happen.
Somebody tried to steal it. Next thing you know, Steven Seagal style, neck snap, out of nowhere, dead in the driveway. Never even saw it coming.
Oh, and my dad will be at the clinic next weekend too. So,
Fantastic.
Lots of good stuff. So,
love it.
Brother, you stay safe. You're looking good. And I know we're talking this week about a lot of other stuff. For Marcus, I'm David. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening. Peace.